The fog rolled thick across the Alaskan training grounds like a living creature, swallowing visibility whole. It was the kind of morning where even seasoned snipers questioned their worth. The kind of morning where the U.S. Navy's elite marksman had just failed 3 times in a row to hit a target 200 yards out through the dense coastal mist. Commander Jackson Reed stood with arms crossed, jaw tight, staring at the range through high-powered optics. Behind him, 6 of the Navy's best snipers lowered their rifles in frustration. Their M110 semi-automatic sniper systems, state-of-the-art, thermal-scoped, precision-engineered, had just been rendered useless by nature itself. "This is a waste of time," muttered Petty Officer First Class Derek Munson, wiping condensation from his scope. "You can't shoot what you can't see." "Tell that to the enemy," Reed shot back coldly. "Conditions don't care about your comfort zone." That's when she stepped forward. Sarah Thornhill was 29 years old, lean as a wolf, with sharp green eyes that seemed to cut through fog better than any optic ever could. Her hair, the color of wet earth, was pulled back in a tight braid beneath her Navy-issued cap. But what drew every eye in that moment wasn't her uniform. It was the rifle slung across her back, an M1 Garand, the legendary rifle of World War II, wood and steel. No scope, no thermal imaging, no modern ergonomics, just iron sights and the ghosts of 1,000 battlefields etched into its worn frame. "Permission to take the shot, Commander," Sarah said, her voice calm as still water. Reed turned, eyebrows raised. "Corporal Thornhill, this isn't a history lesson. We're testing modern equipment under adverse conditions." "With respect, sir, modern equipment just failed 3 times. She gestured to the range. "Let me show you what old-school discipline looks like." A few of the men chuckled. Munson outright laughed. "You're kidding, right? That thing doesn't even have a scope." "You planning to wish the bullet to target?" Sarah didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just stared at him until his smirk faded. "My father carried this rifle through the Korean War," she said quietly. Every word a small stone dropped into deep water. "He taught me that technology fails. Instinct doesn't." Commander Reed studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "You've got 1 shot, Thornhill. Make it count." Sarah moved to the firing line with the grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times in her sleep. She knelt, resting the Garand across her knee, and closed her eyes. The other snipers watched with a mixture of curiosity and condescension. But Sarah wasn't thinking about them. She was thinking about Juno, about the small cabin on the edge of the wilderness where she'd grown up. About her father, Captain William Thornhill, who'd returned from war with shadows in his eyes but steady hands. He'd taught her to shoot when she was 8 years old, not with fancy equipment, but with patience, breath control, and respect for the weapon. "Listen to the wind, Sarah," he'd whisper on those frozen mornings. "It'll tell you where to aim. And when the mist comes, don't fight it. Move with it. Become it." That's how she'd earned her nickname, Mist Walker. Sarah opened her eyes and studied the range. The fog was thick, rolling in waves. The target, a silhouette representing an enemy combatant, was barely visible even through the spotting scope. The other snipers had relied on technology to pierce the veil, but technology couldn't adapt, couldn't feel, couldn't listen. She could. Sarah shouldered the Garand, feeling its familiar weight settle into her bones. The wood was smooth under her cheek, worn by her father's face before hers. She aligned the iron sights, but she didn't rely on them. Instead, she closed her eyes again, breathing slow and deep. She felt the wind, a gentle push from the northeast. She felt the moisture in the air the way it would slow the bullet just slightly. She felt the earth beneath her, solid and patient. And then she felt her father's hand on her shoulder, not really there, but present all the same. "Steady, kiddo. Let the world go quiet." Sarah exhaled half a breath and held it, squeezed the trigger with the gentlest pressure. The Garand kicked against her shoulder with its distinctive bark, a sound that belonged to another era, but somehow felt more real than anything modern. The bullet left the barrel at 2,800 feet per second. It cut through the fog like a blade through silk, arcing slightly to compensate for wind drift. Time seemed to slow. Commander Reed raised his binoculars. The other snipers held their breath despite themselves. 1,200 yards away, through impossible visibility, the target took the hit dead center mass. Silence. Then Reed's voice, barely above a whisper. Jesus Christ. He lowered his binoculars and turned to Sarah, who was already standing, the Garand held loosely at her side. How the hell did you do that? Sarah met his eyes. My father used to say that modern snipers aim with their eyes. Old school snipers aim with their soul. Munson stepped forward, face red. That was luck. Pure luck. Then let her try again, Reed said, his voice hard. Same conditions. Different target. Sarah nodded once. She returned to the line, chambered another round from the Garand's distinctive en-bloc clip, and took her position. This time, she didn't close her eyes. She simply breathed, felt, and fired. Another hit. Center mass. The third shot came at Reed's insistence. Another perfect hit. By the fourth shot, nobody was laughing anymore. Sarah stood and ejected the empty clip, the metallic ping echoing across the silent range like a bell tolling the end of an argument. She turned to face the group, her expression unchanged. Technology is a tool, she said quietly, but it's not a replacement for skill. My father taught me that. This rifle taught me that. And Juneau, where I learned to hunt in fog so thick you couldn't see your own boots, taught me that. Commander Reed approached her slowly, his face unreadable. Then, to everyone's shock, he extended his hand. Where did you learn to shoot like that, Corporal? From a man who believed discipline and instinct were worth more than any scope, Sarah replied, shaking his hand firmly. And from a place that doesn't forgive mistakes. Reed glanced at the Garand, then back at her. I want you to teach a class. Next week. Show my snipers what you just showed me. Munson bristled. Sir, with all due respect. With all due respect, petty officer, you just got outshot by a rifle older than your grandfather. Reed's voice was ice. I suggest you shut up and learn something. Sarah didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply nodded, slung the Garand across her back, and walked away into the fog. Behind her, 6 modern snipers stood in silence, staring at the targets they couldn't hit, and the woman who made the impossible look effortless. And somewhere in the mist, Sarah could almost hear her father's voice, proud and quiet. That's my girl. Chapter 2. The Legacy of Iron. The classroom smelled like gun oil and old coffee. Sarah stood at the front, the M1 Garand resting on the table beside her like a sleeping veteran. 12 Navy snipers sat in the chairs before her, their expressions ranging from skeptical to openly hostile. This wasn't a lesson they'd asked for. It was an order. Commander Reed stood in the back, arms crossed, watching. Good morning, Sarah began, her voice steady. I'm Corporal Sarah Thornhill. You can call me Mist Walker, or you can call me Corporal. What you don't get to call me is Lucky. A few eyes narrowed. Munson, seated front and center, leaned back with his arms crossed. With respect, Corporal. One good day on the range doesn't make you an instructor. Sarah picked up the Garand and held it horizontally across both palms, presenting it like an offering. This rifle was manufactured in 1943. It saw action in the Pacific Theater. My father carried it through Incheon and the Chosin Reservoir. It has no scope, no bipod, no adjustable stock. It weighs nearly 10 pounds loaded. And yet 3 days ago it outperformed every modern rifle in this unit. She set it down gently. So either this rifle is magic or there's something you don't know yet. I'm here to teach you which one it is. One of the younger snipers, a woman named Petty Officer Reyes, raised her hand tentatively. Why use iron sights when we have technology that sees through fog? Because technology fails, Sarah replied simply. Batteries die, optics fog up, electronics short out in water or extreme cold. And when that happens, what do you fall back on? She tapped her temple. Instinct, training, fundamentals. She walked to the whiteboard and drew a simple diagram. A shooter, a bullet trajectory, and environmental factors represented as arrows pushing against the path. Modern snipers rely on ballistic computers and rangefinders to do the math. That's fine, when it works. But do you know what those computers are calculating? Silence. Wind speed and direction, air density, temperature, humidity, Coriolis effect, bullet drop. She circled each factor. A good old-school sniper doesn't need a computer because they've internalized these calculations through thousands of repetitions. They feel the wind. They read the mirage. They know their ammunition's behavior in every condition because they've lived with it. Munson scoffed. So you're saying we should throw away our equipment and go back to World War II? No, Sarah said patiently. I'm saying you should master the fundamentals so thoroughly that equipment becomes an enhancement, not a crutch. When your scope fails at 200 yards in heavy fog, you should still be able to make that shot, because the enemy won't wait for you to fix your tech. She returned to the table and picked up the Garand again. My father used to take me hunting in the Alaskan wilderness. We'd track caribou through fog so thick I couldn't see him walking 3 feet ahead of me. No GPS, no thermal imaging. Just tracks, instinct, and patience. Sarah's voice softened slightly. One morning when I was 16, we were stalking a bull through the mountains. The fog rolled in fast, zero visibility. I panicked, started second-guessing every step. My father stopped, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Don't fight the mist, Sarah. Become it. Move when it moves. Listen when it listens. It's not your enemy, it's your cover." She met each sniper's eyes in turn. That's when I learned that the best snipers don't conquer their environment. They become part of it. Reyes spoke up again, her tone more respectful now. How do you train that kind of instinct? Time, repetition, discomfort. Sarah smiled faintly. Starting tomorrow, we're going to the range at 500. No scopes. No electronics. Just iron sights, breath control, and environmental awareness. We're going to shoot in rain, fog, wind, and low light until you can hit targets with your eyes half closed. A groan rippled through the room. Munson shook his head. This is insane. No. Commander Reed's voice cut through from the back. Everyone turned. What's insane is sending snipers into the field who can't adapt when their equipment fails. Corporal Thornhill just exposed a critical weakness in our training. We're going to fix it. He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping the room. This isn't about replacing modern equipment. It's about being complete shooters. Thornhill's methods will make you better with your M110s, not worse. Understood? Reluctant nods. Reed turned to Sarah. Carry on, Corporal. Sarah nodded and addressed the class again. Let's talk about breath control. It's the foundation of everything. Your heartbeat affects your aim. So does your breathing. Most of you have been taught to take a breath, exhale halfway, and squeeze the trigger at the natural pause. That works. For perfect conditions. She raised the Garand to her shoulder, aiming at an imaginary target. But what happens when you've just sprinted 200 yards to a shooting position? When your heart is pounding and your lungs are burning, the natural pause doesn't exist anymore. She lowered the rifle. My father taught me something called cold breath shooting. You train your body to find calm even when everything is screaming chaos. It starts with meditation. Sounds soft, I know. But SEAL Team 6 uses it. Delta Force uses it. Because warriors who can't control their own bodies can't control a battlefield. Over the next hour, Sarah walked them through exercises. Box breathing, inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. Repeat until the heart rate drops below 60 beats per minute. Then dry fire practice, focusing solely on trigger control without disturbing sight alignment. She demonstrated with the Garand, her movements smooth and economical. Notice how I'm not muscling the rifle. I'm letting it settle naturally into the pocket of my shoulder. My cheek finds the same spot on the stock every time, what we call cheek weld. Consistency is everything. By the end of the session, even Munson looked thoughtful rather than dismissive. As the class filed out, Reyes approached Sarah. Corporal, can I ask you something personal? Go ahead. Your father, is he still around? Sarah's expression flickered, just for a moment. He passed away 4 years ago. Heart attack, sudden. She ran her hand along the Garand stock. This rifle is all I have left of him. That and everything he taught me. Reyes nodded slowly. He'd be proud of you. I hope so, Sarah said quietly. That's why I do this. Not to prove I'm better than anyone, but to honor what he gave me. And maybe to make sure it doesn't die with him. After Reyes left, Commander Reed approached. "Hell of a first-class Thornhill." "Thank you, sir." He glanced at the Garand. "I did some reading last night. That rifle, if it's the one from your service record, saved 12 men during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. Your father was awarded the Silver Star." Sarah nodded, her throat tight. "He never talked about it. I only found out after he died, going through his things." Reed was quiet for a moment. "You know why I'm pushing this training?" "Sir?" "Because 50 years ago, snipers like your father won wars with skill and guts. Then we got lazy. Started thinking technology could replace training. It can't." He met her eyes. "You're proof of that, and these sailors need to see it." Sarah straightened. "I won't let you down, Commander." "I know you won't." Reed turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. Tomorrow's exercise, make it hard, push them. I don't want sailors who can shoot. I want warriors who can adapt." Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Yes, sir. I know just the place." That night, alone in her quarters, Sarah disassembled the Garand with practiced hands. Each piece was familiar. The operating rod, the bolt, the en-bloc clip mechanism. She cleaned it methodically, the way her father had taught her, whispering the old mantra, "Take care of your rifle, and it'll take care of you." When she finished, she held the assembled rifle across her lap and closed her eyes. "I hope I'm doing this right, Dad," she whispered to the empty room. "I hope I'm making you proud." The Garand, silent and heavy in her hands, was the only answer she'd ever get, but somehow it was enough. The Alaskan dawn broke cold and merciless at 0445 hours. Sarah stood at the edge of the training range, watching the fog roll in from the coast like an advancing army. Perfect. Behind her, 12 Navy snipers trudged up the trail, their breath misting in the freezing air. Most looked tired. A few looked annoyed. Munson looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "Good morning," Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. "Welcome to your education." Reyes, ever the eager student, stepped forward. "What's the plan, Corporal?" Sarah gestured to the range behind her, or rather, where the range should have been. The fog had swallowed everything beyond 30 yards. "Today, you're going to learn what my father called blind sight shooting. You're going to hit targets you can barely see, using rifles that have no business making those shots." She'd arranged for a dozen vintage rifles to be brought out, M1 Garands, Springfield 1903s, even a couple of old Winchester Model 70s. They lay on a tarp like relics from a museum. Next to them, the sniper's modern M110 rifles looked sleek and alien by comparison. "You've got to be kidding," Munson muttered. Sarah picked up one of the Garands and tossed it to him. He caught it awkwardly, surprised by its weight. "That rifle won 2 world wars and fought in Korea and Vietnam. Show it some respect." She handed out the remaining rifles, watching as the snipers hefted the unfamiliar weapons with varying degrees of discomfort. "Here's how this works. Phase 1, you'll shoot paper targets at 300 yards with iron sights. No warm-up, no practice rounds. 5 shots. I want to see your fundamentals." "In this fog?" One of the snipers, a stocky man named Petty Officer Collins, asked skeptically. "In this fog," Sarah confirmed. "The targets are out there. Trust me." She'd spent 2 hours before dawn setting up the range, placing targets at precise distances and angles. She knew exactly where each one stood, even if the fog made them invisible from the firing line. That was the point. Take your positions. The snipers spread out along the line, settling into prone positions with varying levels of confidence. Sarah walked behind them, observing their form. Reyes had good bone structure, elbows properly placed, spine aligned. Collins was too tense, gripping the rifle like he was strangling it. Munson's position was technically correct, but his energy radiated resistance. "Begin when ready," Sarah called out. The first shots cracked through the morning air, sharp and distinctive compared to the muffled reports of modern suppressed rifles. Sarah didn't need to check the targets to know most had missed. She could tell by the shooter's body language, the way they tensed after the recoil, the uncertain pause before the second shot. Munson fired his 5 rounds quickly, aggressively, then stood up and glared at the fog. Can't hit what you can't see. Yet you saw me do it 3 days ago, Sarah replied evenly. So either I'm superhuman or you're not trying hard enough. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. After everyone had finished, Sarah walked downrange into the fog. The snipers watched her disappear like a ghost swallowed by mist. She evaluated each target carefully, making mental notes, then returned with the papers in hand. Collins, 2 hits out of 5. Not bad for a first attempt. Your breathing was inconsistent, but your trigger discipline was solid. Collins nodded, looking somewhat encouraged. Reyes, 3 hits. Excellent position, but you're overthinking the aim. Trust your instincts more. Yes, Corporal. She came to Munson's target last. 1 hit, 4 misses, and the single hit was barely on paper. Sarah held it up without comment, letting the evidence speak for itself. This is bullshit, Munson snapped. These rifles are relics. We're wasting time that should be spent training with real equipment. Sarah's expression didn't change. You think that rifle is the problem? I know it is. Then let's test that theory. She walked to the tarp and picked up her father's M1 Garand, the one she'd used 3 days ago. She handed Munson her modern M110. Switch with me. You use the modern rifle. I'll use the relic. Same conditions. 5 shots. Let's see if the equipment is really the issue. Munson's eyes narrowed, but he took the M110. The other snipers watched with renewed interest. Commander Reed, who'd been observing from a distance, moved closer. Sarah returned to the firing line and dropped into a prone position with the fluid grace of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. She didn't rush, didn't show off. She simply breathed, felt the wind on her left cheek, listened to the way the fog moved, and began to fire. 5 shots, 5 seconds between each one, controlled, methodical. When she finished, Munson took his position with the M110, its advanced optics and modern ergonomics, a stark contrast to the wooden rifle Sarah had just used. He fired his 5 rounds with technical precision, using every advantage the weapon offered. Sarah stood and gestured downrange. Let's check. They walked into the fog together, the rest of the class following. Sarah's target came first. 5 holes clustered in a group no larger than a softball. All would have been killing shots. Munson's target, shot with the superior rifle, showed 3 hits, respectable but spread across the paper with less consistency. Silence. Sarah turned to Munson, her voice quiet but firm. The rifle isn't the problem. Your mindset is. You're fighting the conditions instead of adapting to them. You're relying on technology to solve problems that require skill. Munson's face reddened, but before he could respond, Commander Reed stepped forward. Corporal Thornhill is right, and I'm tired of hearing excuses. He addressed the entire class now, his voice hard. You are U.S. Navy snipers, elite marksmen. But elite doesn't mean comfortable. It means capable in any situation, with any tool, under any condition. If you can't make a shot because your scope fogged up or your electronics failed, you're not elite, you're dependent. He pointed at Sarah. This sailor just showed you what discipline looks like, what mastery looks like. I suggest you start taking notes. The training intensified from there. Sarah ran them through drill after drill, shooting from kneeling positions, from improvised rests, from awkward angles. She made them shoot after sprinting, after doing push-ups, after spinning in circles until they were dizzy. Every exercise was designed to strip away comfort and force adaptation. Environmental awareness, she called out during one drill. What's the wind doing right now? 5 to 7 miles per hour northeast, Reyes answered quickly. How do you know? The way the fog is moving. The feel on my face. Good. Collins, what's the temperature? 32 degrees. Close. 34. And why does that matter? Collins hesitated. Sarah answered for him. Because temperature affects air density, which affects bullet trajectory. A bullet travels differently through cold air than warm air. If you don't know the conditions, you're just guessing. She spent an hour teaching them to read mirage, the heat shimmer that reveals wind direction and speed at the target. She taught them to identify wind indicators, moving grass, swaying branches, ripples on water. She showed them how to estimate range using the mil-dot reticle in scopes, then made them do it with iron sights using mathematical formulas and known reference sizes. By noon, every sniper was exhausted, humbled, and quietly amazed. During a brief water break, Reyes approached Sarah. "How long did it take you to learn all this?" Sarah smiled faintly. "I've been shooting since I was 8. My father started me with a .22 rifle and paper plates nailed to trees. No targets with nice clean circles, just plates, at random distances, in whatever weather came. He'd say, 'If you can't hit your dinner, you don't eat.'" "That's harsh." "That's Alaska," Sarah replied. "But it taught me that shooting isn't a sport. It's a survival skill, and survival doesn't care about comfort." As the day wore on, something shifted in the class. The resistance faded. The complaints stopped. Even Munson, though still proud, began asking questions instead of making excuses. Sarah saw the change and felt a quiet satisfaction. This was what her father had given her, not just skill, but the ability to pass it on. The final exercise of the day was the hardest. Sarah set up targets at 600 yards, still in heavy fog, and gave each sniper one shot with iron sights. Just one. No do-overs. "This is your gut check moment," she told them. "Everything you learned today comes down to this. Breathe, feel, trust yourself." One by one they fired. Some hit, some missed. But every single one of them tried, really tried, with focus and discipline they hadn't shown that morning. Munson went last. He settled into position, the old Garand heavy in his hands. Sarah watched him take 3 deep breaths, his shoulders dropping with each exhale. He'd been listening after all. The shot rang out. Downrange, the target pinged, a solid hit. Munson lowered the rifle slowly, something like surprise crossing his face. Sarah walked over and extended her hand. After a moment, he shook it. "Not bad," she said simply. "Thanks, Corporal." His voice was quieter now. I get it. What you've been trying to teach us." Sarah nodded. "Good. Because tomorrow, we do it all again. Harder." A collective groan rose from the class, but it was different now, edged with determination rather than complaint. As the sun set and the class dispersed, Commander Reed approached Sarah one more time. "You did something today I wasn't sure was possible." "What's that, sir?" "You made them believe in themselves more than their equipment." He glanced at the old Garand in her hands. "Your father would be damn proud, Corporal." Sarah looked down at the rifle, running her thumb along the worn wood. "I hope so, sir. Every day, I hope so." That night, as she cleaned the Garand in her quarters, Sarah whispered the words her father used to say. "A warrior isn't defined by the weapon they carry. They're defined by the spirit they bring to the fight." And somewhere in the Alaskan wilderness, in the fog and the mountains where she'd learned to shoot, that spirit lived on. 6 months had passed since Sarah's training program began. What started as a single week of instruction had evolved into a permanent curriculum. The Thornhill method, as it became unofficially known, was now being tested across multiple Navy sniper schools. But Sarah herself had moved on to something more dangerous. She stood on the deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln, watching the Mediterranean Sea roll beneath a moonless sky. The carrier was positioned 60 miles off the coast of a North African nation gripped by civil war. Somewhere in the chaos of that coastline, a humanitarian disaster was unfolding, and Sarah's team had just received the call to act. Commander Reed appeared beside her, his face grim in the red glow of the deck lights. "Mission brief in 5 minutes, Corporal. This one's real." Sarah nodded, her pulse steady. This was what all the training had been for. Not exercises, not demonstrations. Life and death. The briefing room was packed. Sarah sat among 20 special operations personnel, SEALs, Marines, and intelligence officers. A satellite image appeared on the screen, a coastal compound surrounded by hostile terrain. Commander Reed stood at the front, pointer in hand. 18 hours ago, a group of humanitarian workers, doctors mostly, were taken hostage by a militant faction. They're being held in this compound approximately 12 miles inland. Negotiations have failed. The militants have threatened to execute the hostages at dawn. That gives us 8 hours. The room was silent, tense. Reed continued. The compound is heavily defended. 60 to 70 hostiles, well armed and dug in. Standard extraction is high risk, but intelligence has identified a tactical opportunity. He zoomed in on the satellite image, highlighting a tower structure. The compound has a single guard tower overlooking the main courtyard where the hostages are being held. The tower has 2 sentries with overlapping fields of fire. They rotate every 2 hours. He looked directly at Sarah. If we can eliminate both sentries simultaneously and silently, we create a blind spot for our assault team to breach the compound. The problem is distance and angle. The shot is 1,150 yards from our nearest concealed position, through variable wind coming off the ocean, with a 15-degree upward angle. Sarah studied the image. It was a nightmare shot, long range, awkward geometry, hostile environment, and the margin for error was 0. If either sentry survived to raise an alarm, the hostages would die. "I need 2 snipers," Reed said. "1 for each target, simultaneous trigger pull, coordinated to the millisecond. Miss and people die." Lieutenant Mason, one of the veteran SEAL snipers, spoke up. "Sir, with respect, that shot is at the edge of effective range for our M110s, especially in those wind conditions, and coordinating simultaneous hits." "I know," Reed interrupted. "That's why I'm asking for volunteers, not assigning." Silence. Sarah felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Then she stood. "I'll take it, Commander." Reed met her eyes. "You sure, Corporal?" "Yes, sir." Lieutenant Mason stood as well. "I'm in. If Thornhill's making the shot, I want to be next to her." Reed nodded slowly. "All right. You 2 are our primary sniper team. The assault force inserts via RHIBs at 0300. You'll be inserted by helicopter 2 hours earlier to get into position. First light is 0530. The shot happens at 0515. Questions?" Sarah had a dozen, but only one mattered. "What's the wind forecast?" "Variable, 5 to 15 miles per hour, shifting direction." "Not ideal." "Never is," Sarah murmured. After the briefing, she returned to her quarters and opened her gear locker. Her standard issue M110 sat ready, cleaned and zeroed, but next to it, carefully wrapped in a worn canvas bag, was her father's M1 Garand. She'd brought it aboard against regulations, unable to leave it behind. Now, staring at both rifles, she faced a choice. The M110 was superior in every measurable way. Better range, better optics, better ergonomics. But the Garand was something else. It was memory and instinct, and 1,000 hours of training in conditions just like these. A knock on her door. Lieutenant Mason stepped inside. He was mid-40s, graying at the temples, with the calm demeanor of a man who'd seen every kind of combat. "Got a minute, Corporal?" "Of course, sir." He nodded at the 2 rifles. "Which one are you taking?" Sarah hesitated. "I don't know. Logically, the M110 makes sense. It's built for this mission." "But," Mason prompted. "But logic isn't everything. My father used to say that in critical moments, you fall back to your deepest training. And my deepest training, it's with that rifle." She gestured at the Garand. Mason was quiet for a moment, then surprised her by smiling. "You know what I carried on my first combat deployment? My grandfather's 1911 pistol. Damn thing was twice as heavy as the Beretta we were issued, kicked like a mule, and held half the ammunition. But it felt right. It felt like him watching my back." He stepped closer, examining the Garand. "This isn't about equipment, Thornhill. It's about confidence. If you trust that rifle more than any other, if you know its quirks and capabilities like breathing, then that's your weapon. The hostages don't care what you shoot them with. They care that you don't miss." Sarah picked up the Garand, feeling its familiar weight. "What if I'm wrong? What if sentiment clouds my judgment?" "Then you're human," Mason replied. "But I've seen you shoot. You're not wrong." After he left, Sarah made her decision. She loaded the Garand with match-grade ammunition, modern cartridges hand-loaded to exact specifications. The old rifle would fire new bullets, bridging past and present. Then she disassembled, cleaned, and reassembled it one final time, whispering the old ritual: "Take care of your rifle, and it'll take care of you." At 0100 hours, Sarah and Mason boarded an MH-60 Seahawk helicopter. The crew chief handed them headsets as the rotors spun up. Through the window, Sarah watched the carrier deck disappear beneath them, replaced by endless black ocean. The flight took 30 minutes. They landed 2 miles from the target in a dry riverbed, the helicopter departing immediately to avoid detection. Sarah and Mason moved through the darkness with practiced silence, their gear carefully chosen to minimize noise. Every step was calculated, every breath measure. They reached their position, a rocky outcrop overlooking the compound, with 90 minutes to spare. Sarah sat up behind a cluster of boulders, Mason beside her with his M110. Below, the compound was lit by scattered floodlights. The guard tower rose like a dark finger against the stars. Mason glassed the tower through his scope. "I've got eyes on both sentries. One facing north, one facing south. They're alert." Sarah settled behind the Garand, adjusting her position until everything felt right. The iron sights gleamed faintly in the starlight. She'd practiced this shot 100 times in training, but never with lives hanging in the balance. The minutes crawled past. Sarah used the time to study the environment. The wind was tricky, gusting and shifting as it came off the ocean and funneled through the valley. She wet her finger and held it up, feeling the breeze. Approximately 8 miles per hour, shifting between northeast and east. Temperature in the low 60s, humidity moderate. She ran the calculations in her head, adjusting her mental picture of the bullet's path. At 150 yards, the .30-06 round from the Garand would drop approximately 35 feet and drift several feet with the wind. She'd have to aim high and slightly left, but the exact correction would depend on the wind at the moment of the shot. 15 minutes, Mason whispered. Sarah closed her eyes and began her breathing exercises. Box breathing. 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, 4 counts hold. Her heart rate dropped. The world narrowed. She felt her father's presence again, that familiar sensation of calm focus he'd taught her. 5 minutes. She opened her eyes and settled into position. The sentry came into view through her iron sights. A human figure, distant and small. She pushed away the thought that this was a person. Right now, he was a target, a threat to innocent lives. Her job was to remove that threat. "Assault team is in position," Commander Reed's voice crackled through the radio. "Sniper team, you are cleared to engage on your count." Mason adjusted his aim on the second sentry. "I'm ready when you are, Corporal." Sarah felt the wind on her face. It had steadied, 7 miles per hour, almost due east. The stars above were impossibly clear. Somewhere in that compound, 18 people were praying for a miracle they didn't know was coming. "On my count," Sarah whispered. 3, 2, 1. She squeezed the trigger with infinite gentleness. The Garand roared, a sound that belonged to another era but felt perfectly right in this moment. Beside her, Mason's M110 coughed through its suppressor. The bullet left the Garand at 2,800 feet per second. It climbed through the night air, arcing up and over the invisible terrain of wind and gravity. Time seemed to freeze. Sarah's world reduced to that single projectile carrying her will across impossible distance. 1,150 yards away, the sentry dropped without a sound. Mason's target fell a fraction of a second later. "Targets down," Mason confirmed. "Clean hits, both of them." Sarah exhaled slowly, her hands steady. The assault team surged forward, moving through the blind spot she'd created. Explosions lit up the compound as breaching charges detonated. Gunfire erupted, sharp, controlled, professional. The SEALs moved like shadows, clearing rooms with lethal precision. 16 minutes later, Commander Reed's voice returned. "All hostages secured. 18 souls extracted safely. Good shooting, sniper team." Sarah lowered the Garand, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was fading. 18 people. 18 lives that had hung on the edge of a trigger pull. She'd made the shot. The old rifle had made the shot. Mason gripped her shoulder. "Hell of a shot, Thornhill. Your old man would be proud." Sarah looked at the Garand, its wood warm from her hands, its steel cold in the night air. "Yeah," she whispered. "I think he would." The sun was rising over the Mediterranean by the time they returned to the carrier. Sarah stood on the deck, exhausted but at peace, watching the light paint the waves gold. Commander Reed found her there. "The hostages are on their way home," he said quietly. "Because of you. Because of that rifle." Because of everything your father taught you. Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Reed continued. I'm recommending you for the Navy Cross. What you did tonight, that shot, under those conditions with that weapon, it's going in the record books. It wasn't about records, sir. I know, that's what makes it remarkable. He paused. Your father's rifle saved 12 men at Chosin Reservoir. Tonight it saved 18 more. That's 30 lives across 2 generations. Think about that. After Reed left, Sarah sat alone with the Garand across her lap. She thought about her father, about the lessons he'd taught her on cold Alaskan mornings. She thought about the weight of tradition and the power of discipline. And she thought about the future, about other young shooters who might learn from what she'd proven. The old rifle and the old ways still had power. Not because they were superior to modern technology, but because they taught something technology couldn't. That true mastery comes from the warrior, not the weapon. As the carrier turned toward home, Sarah whispered one final time to the rifle in her hands. We did it, Dad. We kept the promise. The Garand, silent and heavy, seemed to whisper back, I know, kiddo. I always knew you would. If you believe that courage, discipline, and legacy matter more than technology, that the warrior defines the weapon, not the other way around, comment on or below. And don't forget to tell us, where are you watching from? Your city and country matter to us.